What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses finds herself caught in the crossfire of a heated political debate that spirals completely out of control? What happens when years of professional respect crumble in a matter of minutes on live television? What happens when Meryl Streep, known for her grace and composure, reaches her absolute breaking point and erupts in a way nobody saw coming? You're about to witness one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history, so make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this explosive confrontation. The View's studio was buzzing with its usual energy as the cameras rolled for what seemed like another routine episode. Meryl Streep had been invited as a guest to discuss her latest film project, a biographical drama that had been generating significant awards buzz. The conversation started innocently enough, with the typical pleasantries and promotional talk that viewers had come to expect from celebrity interviews. "Meryl, it's always such a pleasure to have you here," Whoopi began, leaning back in her chair with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Your new film has been getting incredible reviews. Tell us about taking on this particular role." Streep smiled graciously, adjusting her position slightly as she prepared to answer. "Well, Whoopi, this character presented such a unique challenge because she lived through some of the most turbulent times in our nation's history. I felt a real responsibility to honor her story and the experiences of women like her who often had their voices silenced." The other co-hosts nodded approvingly, and for a moment, everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as planned. Joy Behar chimed in with a follow-up question about Streep's preparation process, and the actress began sharing anecdotes about her research and the people she had met while developing the character. "I spent months reading letters and diaries from that era," Streep continued, her passion for the project evident in her voice. "These women faced incredible obstacles, but they persevered with such dignity and strength. Their stories deserve to be told accurately, without political spin or agenda." It was at this moment that something shifted in Whoopi's demeanor. Her smile became more forced, and there was a subtle tension in her voice when she responded. "That's interesting you mention political spin, Meryl, because some people might argue that Hollywood has its own agenda when it comes to telling historical stories." Streep's eyebrows raised slightly, clearly not expecting the conversation to take this particular turn. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, Whoopi. Are you suggesting that artists shouldn't have the freedom to interpret historical events through their own lens?" "Oh, I'm not suggesting anything," Whoopi replied, her tone becoming more pointed. "I'm just saying that when certain people in Hollywood take on these projects, they tend to push very specific narratives that align with very specific political viewpoints. And some of us remember when you used certain award ceremonies as your personal political platform." The atmosphere in the studio grew noticeably tense. The other co-hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, and you could practically feel the energy shift through the screen. Streep's professional composure remained intact, but there was a flash of something, surprise perhaps, or maybe irritation, that crossed her face for just a moment. "Whoopi, if you have something specific you'd like to discuss, I think we should address it directly rather than speaking in generalities," Streep said, her voice measured but firm. "I've always been open about my beliefs, and I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am." Whoopi leaned forward, and her next words would prove to be the spark that ignited what was about to become an unforgettable television moment. "What you are, Meryl, is someone who thinks their opinion matters more than everyone else's, just because you can cry on command and read lines someone else wrote for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the studio audience seemed to collectively hold their breath as the weight of Whoopi's words hung in the air. Streep's face went through a series of micro-expressions: shock, hurt, and then something that looked very much like controlled fury. "Excuse me?" Streep's voice was quiet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it that suggested she was barely keeping her emotions in check. "Did you just dismiss my entire career and reduce my life's work to reading lines?" Whoopi didn't back down. If anything, she seemed emboldened by having gotten such a clear reaction. "I'm just saying that maybe actors should stick to acting instead of thinking they're qualified to lecture the rest of us about politics and social issues. You live in a bubble, Meryl. You have no idea what real people are dealing with." The other co-hosts were clearly scrambling to figure out how to handle the situation. Sunny Hostin attempted to interject with something about respecting different perspectives, but neither Streep nor Whoopi seemed to hear her. The two women were locked in what was rapidly becoming a battle of wills, and it was clear that this was about much more than just politics or Hollywood's role in society. A bubble? Streep repeated, her voice rising slightly. Whoopi, I've spent my entire career trying to understand and portray the human experience in all its complexity. I've worked with people from every walk of life, and I've never claimed to have all the answers. But I do have the right to express my opinions, just like every other American citizen. Oh, please, Whoopi shot back, rolling her eyes dramatically. Spare me the humble artist routine. You get up on stages in front of millions of people and act like you're some kind of moral authority. You think because people applaud your performances, that means they want to hear your political opinions too. That comment hit Streep like a physical blow, and for the first time in the interview, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. Her hands, which had been folded neatly in her lap, clenched slightly, and when she spoke, there was a tremor of barely controlled anger in her voice. You know what, Whoopi? I think you're confusing having a platform with having an obligation to stay silent. When I speak about issues I care about, I'm not claiming to be a moral authority. I'm exercising the same rights that you exercise every single day on this very show. The only difference is that you seem to think your opinions are more valid than mine. Whoopi's laugh was sharp and humorless. The difference, Meryl, is that I don't live in a mansion in Connecticut and pretend to understand what working people go through. I came from nothing, I worked my way up, and I earned my right to have opinions about the real world. You've been handed everything on a silver platter since you graduated from Yale. The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in instinctively, capturing every micro-expression as the confrontation intensified. Streep's face flushed slightly, and her voice took on a tone that none of the viewers had ever heard from her before. Handed everything on a silver platter? Streep's voice was incredulous. Whoopi, do you have any idea what it was like trying to make it as a serious actress in the 1970s? Do you know how many times I was told I wasn't pretty enough, wasn't commercial enough, wasn't worth the risk? I fought for every single role I ever got, and I worked harder than most people work in their entire lives to prove that I belonged in this industry. Whoopi waved her hand dismissively. Oh, boo-hoo. Poor little rich girl had to audition for parts. Let me tell you about real struggle, Meryl. Let me tell you about being a black woman trying to make it in comedy when nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. Let me tell you about being homeless and performing on the streets just to survive. I have never diminished your struggles or your achievements, Streep fired back, her voice rising noticeably. But you seem determined to diminish mine. Why? Because I happened to be born into different circumstances? Because I had access to education? That doesn't make my work any less valid, or my opinions any less worthy of respect. The other co-hosts were looking increasingly desperate to regain control of the situation. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in with a comment about how both women had overcome challenges in their careers, but Whoopi cut her off with a sharp gesture. This isn't about respect, Meryl. This is about accountability. When you get up at award shows and start lecturing people about politics, you're using your privilege to push an agenda. And then when people push back, you act like you're being persecuted. Well, guess what? Some of us don't have the luxury of living in your ivory tower. Streep's eyes flashed with genuine anger now, and her voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level. Ivory tower? Whoopi, you're sitting on a nationally televised talk show, making millions of dollars expressing your political opinions to millions of people every single day. How exactly is that different from what you're accusing me of doing? Because I'm honest about who I am and where I come from, Whoopi snapped. I don't pretend to be some delicate flower who just happens to have opinions. I own my biases, I own my perspective, and I don't hide behind some fake persona of artistic integrity. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and something in Streep's expression shifted dramatically. The hurt was still there, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a cold fury that was genuinely frightening to witness. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable steel in it that suggested she was done being the victim in this exchange. Fake persona? Streep repeated slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Whoopi, are you seriously suggesting that my entire career, everything I've worked for and achieved, is somehow fraudulent? Are you saying that my commitment to my craft, my dedication to telling stories that matter, is all just an act? Whoopi shrugged, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I'm saying that maybe it's time someone called you out on your holier-than-thou attitude. You walk around acting like you're above it all, like you're some kind of artistic saint who just happens to have very convenient political opinions. The transformation in Streep was remarkable and terrifying. The gracious, diplomatic actress who had walked onto the set that morning was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she was ready for war. Her back straightened, her chin lifted, and when she spoke, every word was delivered with surgical precision. You want to know what I think, Whoopi? I think you're jealous. I think you're bitter that despite all your success, despite all your achievements, you still feel the need to tear down other women to make yourself feel better. I think you've been looking for an excuse to attack me for years, and you finally found one that you thought would play well with your audience. The gasps from the studio audience were audible now, and the other co-hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Whoopi's face had gone completely rigid, and her eyes were blazing with an anger that matched Streep's own. "How dare you?" Whoopi said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow more menacing than if she had been shouting. "How dare you sit there in your designer outfit and your perfect makeup and accuse me of being jealous of you? You don't know anything about me, and you sure as hell don't know anything about what I've had to overcome to get where I am. And you don't know anything about me either." Streep shot back, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But that hasn't stopped you from making assumptions and launching personal attacks. The difference is, I'm not the one who invited a guest onto my show just to ambush them with petty grievances and professional jealousy." The word ambush seemed to hit Whoopi like a slap across the face. Her mouth opened and closed for a moment, as if she was struggling to find words, and then she leaned forward with a look of pure venom in her eyes. "Ambush? You think this is an ambush? This is called accountability, Meryl. This is what happens when someone finally has the courage to call you out on your sanctimonious garbage. You've been floating around Hollywood for decades acting like you're better than everyone else, and nobody's ever had the guts to tell you the truth. That was it. That was the moment when something inside Meryl Streep finally snapped completely. Her face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, hurt, rage, and then something that looked almost like relief, as if she had finally been given permission to say everything she had been holding back for years. "The truth?" Streep's voice was rising now, and there was a quality to it that nobody in that studio had ever heard before. "You want to talk about truth, Whoopi? Here's the truth. You invited me here under false pretenses so you could attack me on live television because you can't stand the fact that I've managed to maintain my dignity and my principles throughout my career. You're so threatened by anyone who doesn't bow down to your particular brand of wisdom that you resort to personal attacks and character assassination." Whoopi tried to interrupt, but Streep held up her hand with such authority that even Whoopi fell silent for a moment. The entire studio was transfixed, watching as one of the most respected actresses in Hollywood prepared to unleash decades of pent-up frustration. "No, you're going to listen to me now," Streep continued, her voice gaining power with each word. "You want to talk about struggle? Let me tell you about struggle. Let me tell you about being a young woman in an industry that saw me as nothing more than a pretty face, even though I wasn't pretty enough by their standards. Let me tell you about being told that audiences wouldn't connect with me because I was too cerebral, too complicated, too much of everything that made me who I am." The passion in her voice was unmistakable now, and even Whoopi seemed momentarily stunned by the transformation she was witnessing. Streep was no longer the diplomatic guest trying to navigate a difficult situation. She was a force of nature, and she was just getting started. "You think I've been handed everything on a silver platter? I've been working since I was a teenager. I put myself through school, I waited tables, I lived in tiny apartments with 3 roommates, and I auditioned for hundreds of roles that I didn't get because I wasn't what they were looking for. But I never gave up, and I never compromised my integrity to make things easier." Whoopi's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, but she seemed to sense that interrupting now would be a mistake. Streep was in full flow, and there was something almost hypnotic about watching her speak with such raw honesty. "And you know what the real irony is, Whoopi? I've always respected you. I've always admired your journey and your accomplishments. When you broke barriers in comedy and film, I celebrated that. When you used your platform to speak about issues you cared about, I supported that. But apparently, that respect only flows in one direction." The other co-hosts were completely frozen now, realizing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and even the camera operators seemed mesmerized by what they were capturing. "You accuse me of living in an ivory tower, but you're the one who's lost touch with reality," Streep continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her decades of experience and training. "You sit behind this desk every day passing judgment on everyone and everything, never considering that maybe, just maybe, other people's perspectives have value too. You've become exactly what you claim to hate, someone who thinks their opinion is the only one that matters." Whoopi finally found her voice, but it came out as more of a snarl than words. "How dare you lecture me about perspective? You've never faced real adversity in your life. You've never had to fight for basic respect, never had to prove that you belonged anywhere. Everything has been handed to you, and now you want to act like you're some kind of victim." "Victim?" Streep's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The only thing I'm a victim of today is your unprofessional behavior and your inability to separate your personal feelings from your job as a host. You've turned what should have been a simple interview about my work into a character assassination attempt. And for what? Because you don't like my politics? Because you're threatened by women who refuse to stay in the box you think they belong in?" The cameras were capturing every moment of this extraordinary confrontation, and you could practically feel the tension radiating through the screen. Whoopi's hands were clenched into fists now, and her voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "I'm not threatened by you, Meryl. I'm disgusted by your hypocrisy. You preach about equality and justice while living a life of privilege that most people can't even imagine. You talk about understanding the human experience while surrounding yourself with other wealthy celebrities who tell you how wonderful you are. And you've become a bully?" Streep shot back without hesitation. "You use this show as your personal platform to attack anyone who doesn't agree with you, and you hide behind your past struggles as if they give you the right to be cruel and vindictive. Well, they don't. Your experiences don't excuse your behavior, and they certainly don't give you the right to tear down other women who've worked just as hard as you have." The silence that followed was absolutely electric. Whoopi's face had gone through several shades of red, and when she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Get out," she said simply. "Just get out of my studio." Streep stood up slowly, maintaining her dignity even in this impossible situation. She gathered her purse and looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and clear. "I came here today to talk about my work and the story I wanted to tell. Instead, I've been subjected to a personal attack that has nothing to do with my film and everything to do with one person's need to tear others down. I hope the viewers at home can see this for what it really is." As she turned to leave, Whoopi couldn't resist getting in one final shot. "Don't let the door hit you on your way out, Your Highness." Streep paused at the edge of the set and turned back one final time, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "You know what, Whoopi? 30 years from now, when people remember this moment, they're not going to remember your clever insults or your righteous indignation. They're going to remember that you used your position of power to bully a guest who came here in good faith. And that says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are." With that, she walked off the set, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and an audience that had just witnessed one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. The cameras kept rolling as Whoopi sat in stunned silence, finally realizing that she had just made a tremendous mistake on live television. That was the moment when Meryl Streep showed the world that even the most gracious and diplomatic people have their breaking point, and when that point is reached, the results can be absolutely explosive. What did you think about Streep's response? Was she justified in defending herself so forcefully, or should she have taken the high road? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't believe actually happened.